A Shot in the Dark by Silverpup. Chapter 17. Bifur was not mad. He knew what the others said about him, what they thought when they saw the axe embedded into his forehead. Lost his mind, they would whisper in common as he walked away. Can only speak in Cuzdal now. Can't communicate any other way. Such a shame. Fools. Just because they couldn't recall how to speak common didn't mean he couldn't understand it. Bifur had not lost his mind with his injury, simply a few skills and memories. He was still perfectly capable of fighting in a war, or in building a raft, or whatever else was asked of him. He knew how to read a map, barter for supplies, and find food. He could still read the stars and ride a pony and sing along to drinking songs. Bifur was not anything less with his injury, no matter what the others thought. Did they not realize that had he been anything less, then Thorin would not have taken him along? There were simply some things he could not recall. Little things that didn't have any effect on his daily life, but were important to him for sentimental reasons. Like the name of his sister, or the smell of his mother's perfume, or what color his father's eyes had been, or if his brother had died during the fall of Erebor or after. Sometimes he even caught himself talking to Bjarte about his day at work, or asking what he wanted for dinner that night. Then he would catch himself and realize that he had been talking to air because Bjarte had been dead for 60 years. Or was it 40? 50? Did it really matter anymore? He was still dead in the end. Sometimes when he closed his eyes and blocked out the world around him, he could almost remember everything he was forgetting, like the exact shade of brown, chestnut, russet, that Bjarte's hair had been, or the number of freckles, 13, 4, on his left shoulder. Sometimes he could even remember the sound of his laughter. A bell in the wind, right? Or was it a deep drum and a good joke? Sometimes he wondered if he made Bjarte up in his broken mind. How could someone so perfect be real, let alone ever belong to him? Bifur tried not to let the lost memories get to him. There was little he could do about his injury, and even less over the state of his mind. It was a miracle that he even survived such a wound. He was lucky to still be alive and relatively healthy. He counted his blessings every day and tried his best to get on with life, even with the holes in his memory. But was it really a blessing or a curse? It was gratitude for life that drove him to join Thorin in his mad quest to reclaim Erebor. Bifur had survived a near-death injury for a reason. He had been looking for that reason and had found it in his king's plan. He didn't mind signing away his life to help Thorin reclaim their lost kingdom. He didn't mind all the danger they faced or the knowledge that it could end with his death. That was all fine. Bifur was living on borrowed time already. Part of him looked forward to death. It would be nice to rest for once. His easy acceptance of death was why he understood Bilbo. The Hobbit was the same as him, willing to die for a greater cause than himself. He didn't know what had happened to the Hobbit to inspire such logic, but he could relate to the burglar's feelings. There were just some goals, folk, worth dying for. Bjarte had died for him in the end. Bifur still wished it had been him instead. Dale was a city of ghosts. That had been Bilbo's first impression of the ruins the first time around, and he found that it was much the same the second time. Dale was a skeleton of its former glory, a once beautiful and vibrant city that had been gutted and ripped apart by Smaug. Now all that remained of that beauty were hollow buildings, scorched fields, and the unheard cries of those who had never left. "This place is creepy," Keely whispered, staying close to his brother's side. "I think it's haunted," added Feely, fingering the hilt of one of his many blades. "Doubt it. Smaug would chase out even ghosts away," grumbled Gloin as the group made their way through the dead city. In the very back of the group, Bilbo sighed. It had taken them another 2 days to climb through the wilds and up to the looming mountain. The closer they grew to their destination, the bleaker the land began to grow. Smaug had burned away everything that was once alive and green, and left behind only black fields and scorched rocks. Like Dale, it was now only a ghastly imitation of its former self. He wrinkled his nose and tried his best not to sneeze. The smell of smoke and ash was thick in the air, and he could hear nothing but the shuffle of feet and metal. The entire company had grown tense and silent as they inched closer and closer to Erebor. The Hobbit was the only one who was still calm and at ease, and that was only because he was sure Smaug was not awake. Well, partially sure. "How far is the door from here?" Ori asked Zori. We don't know exactly where the door is yet, replied Balin, turning to look at the young dwarf. He gestured to the city with one hand. We're going to camp here and scout the mountain for it. It's a bit risky since we don't know where Smaug is, but we can't waste time. Tomorrow is Durin's day. Ori shivered and eyed the ruins. What if Smaug does notice us here? Don't worry about the dragon. We need to focus on finding the door, advised Dwalin, swinging his hammer in time with his steps. Bolfer grunted. Agreed. Thorin, what's the plan? Scout the area and set up camp, ordered the king, pausing and crossing his arms over his chest. Then set up a watch before we begin scouting the mountain. We will go in groups of 3s and no less. Understood. The company murmured their agreement and broke off to begin making camp. Bilbo sidestepped to the others and carefully made his way to Thorin's side. The king had wandered over to a cliff to gaze up at the lonely mountains above them. I never thought I would see them again, the dwarf said in greeting when he stopped at his side. His blue eyes looked like uncut sapphires as they stared up at the home of his ancestors. Does the sight of them make you feel sad or happy? He asked quietly. Both, replied the king, his lips curling into a small smile. My memories do them no justice. They are more magnificent than I recalled, beautiful and strong and proud. I have never seen a lovelier sight than this. Bilbo squinted up at the Grey Mountain Ridge. We are looking at the mountains here, right? I'm not missing something, am I? Like the carving of a naked dwarf? Thorin snorted and then laughed lightly. Bilbo tried his best to memorize the rare sound. Who knew when he would hear it again? I am speaking of the Lonely Mountains, assured the dwarf, finally looking to his companion. He still kept his body angled toward the mountain range, though. I know it would not be much to you, but these mountains are everything to me. It is here that I was born and raised. It is here that my family lived and where my ancestors are buried. This is my home. Oh, Thorin, he breathed, feeling his heart melt at the confession. He wanted to sweep the dwarf into a hug, but held himself back. Thorin would probably see it as an attack and stab him or something. The king blinked rapidly. You finally said my name. What? Oh, I suppose I did, the hobbit realized, shrugging. Your words were very touching. I couldn't help it. You should do it more often. I gave you my permission, the dwarf reminded him. Bilbo shrugged again. I'll try. Oh, I had a reason for coming over here. I was wondering if I could borrow your map. I wish to study it to find this door we need. I don't see why not. Just remember to give it back. Thorin reached into his massive fur coat and pulled out the rolled-up paper and handed it to the hobbit. Don't let my nephews near it. My homeowner knows what they would do with it. Wander off and get eaten, most likely, grumbled the burglar as he stashed the map away in his own coat. Thorin smiled slightly before his face grew serious once more. Bilbo, do you honestly think we can do this? Defeat Smaug and reclaim Erebor? Do you not doubt me and my crazy plan even a little? The hobbit looked up at the king in surprise. What brought this on? The dwarf shrugged his wide shoulders. I know the others have doubts. Even I doubt myself at times. But you have not shown any of that, so I wonder, do you really believe that we can do this? Bilbo wanted to smack himself in the face. It had foolishly never occurred to him that Thorin would have doubts. Everyone had doubts, even fierce kings with fiercer tempers. He should have seen that coming a mile away. I do, he assured, tentatively settling his hand on Thorin's forearm. I believe in you, and I believe in our comrades. We will win this Thorn Oaken Shield. We will defeat this dragon and get your mountain back. I know it as I surely know the sky is blue and the sun is warm. Thorin stared down at him before slowly bringing his own hand to rest upon Bilbo's. The dwarf's hand practically engulfed his own small one, and his warm touch made something hot uncoil in the pit of his belly. Thank you, Bilbo Baggins, said the king. Something in his face, in his deep blue eyes, made Bilbo think of an egg that had been cracked. Such a sight made him want to reach up and hold it together, but that wasn't his place. Instead, he took a step back and whispered, You're welcome, and then ran away. Coward, the ring mocked him, and for once he didn't disagree with it. Bilbo spent the rest of the day pretending to study the map. It was rather boring business since he knew where to go already, but it was important to give the illusion that he was studying it. So he pretended by staring at it and making faces at the paper as if he was frustrated over it. Eventually, Bomber called him away from it to help with dinner, and he gleefully accepted the chance to do something productive with his time. "I keep expecting Smaug to come raging down on us," the cook confided as they peeled potatoes for the stew. "I'm sure the giant lizard is sleeping," Bilbo reassured. "And if he is awake, I doubt he cares about us, unless he's hungry. Then we may need to worry." "Bilbo, one day your nonchalant attitude is going to get you killed," the dwarf pointed out, but he was smiling, so Bilbo didn't take it personally. "If that happens, you have my permission to mock my corpse," the hobbit promised. Bummer laughed. "I might not get the chance. If it manages to kill you, then it will definitely kill me." "Do I want to know what you two are talking about?" asked Bofer, taking a seat between the two. Bilbo schooled his face into a thoughtful expression. "We are speaking of Smaug and death and mocking. Very deep and meaningful stuff." Bofer nodded back with a remarkably serious face. Of course. It's right up there with the meaning of life and where we go after death. Very deep and important." Bomber simply groaned. "You two are no longer allowed to be left alone unsupervised." "I think you should try that method out on Fili and Keely first," advised Bilbo, pointing at the two brothers. The princes were hunched over something between them and were snickering quietly. He wisely decided that he didn't want to know why. "Thorin tried. It didn't end well for the dwarf left in charge of them," the miner replied as he dug through one of his pockets. "What happened to the dwarf?" wondered Bilbo. "His hair was dyed green and his beard was burned off," Bofer explained absently before cheering as he found what he was looking for. He held it up above his head triumphantly with one hand. "Ha! Here it is!" The hobbit leaned forward and squinted at the wooden object in the dwarf's hand. "It's a whistle." "I've been working on it for the whole journey," the dwarf clarified as he tied the small whistle to a piece of cord. Once done, he leaned forward and slipped it over Bilbo's head. "I carved it for you for when we confront Smaug. If you get in trouble or lost, just blow the whistle and we'll come find you." Bilbo picked up the wooden whistle and ran his fingers over it. It was a simple little thing made of dark wood and decorated with a few curvy designs that were carved into the side. Underneath it, he found two simple letters in Guzdal at the bottom. He honestly thought it was the most beautiful whistle he had ever seen in both lifetimes. "Thank you, Bofer," he said softly, looking up at the toy maker next to him. "It is a wonderful gift. I've never seen a better whistle in my life." In response, Bofer smiled his dimple smile that made his dark eyes light up. "Thank you. It's not my best work, but I'm super proud of it since I made it with so few tools." "It's wonderful," he insisted, gripping the whistle tightly. "I will keep it with me always, I swear it." "Good! That was the idea behind it," the miner replied, scratching at some dirt on his cheek. "Nori thought we should tie a bell to you so we know where you are at all times, but Nori pointed out that it would attract orcs or wargs. A whistle is much more practical and safer." Bilbo's smile dropped into a scowl. "Nori is getting rocks in his bedroll tonight." "If you do, he'll probably crawl into yours in return," pointed out Bomber. Bilbo thought that explained a great deal about the thief, but wasn't stupid enough to say that out loud within the hearing range of Nori. "Nah, he knows Thorin would kill him if he did," assured Bofer, waving a dismissive hand. The cook side-eyed his brother. "Since when have death threats ever stopped Nori?" "Why would Thorin even care in the first place?" wondered Bilbo, staring at the two brothers. The two dwarfs shared a look that the hobbit could not read. Bomber then said something in Guzdal that had Bofer nodding. The cook then sighed deeply while his brother simply laughed. "Don't worry about it," advised the miner, ruffling the hobbit's curls. Bilbo disagreed. He felt like he should very much worry about it, but decided not to share that. He didn't think it would get him an answer anyways. The next day, Bilbo decided it was time to show the others where the door was. Much like the first time, he dragged Fili and Keely with him to scout out the western side of the mountain. Carefully, he guided the two brothers to the great dwarven carving, and then waited for the princes to make the connection. Surprisingly, it was Keely who noticed it first. "Hey, is that..." the prince wondered, tugging on his brother's arm until he got his attention. Fili, I think that's it! I think we found it!" Fili looked to where Keely was pointing, and his jaw dropped. "Thorin's beard! It is! Keely, you did it! You found it! We have to tell the others! Come on!" Bilbo smiled as he watched the two brothers sprint down the dirt mounds in the direction of their camp. He saw no point in going along with them since he had everything he needed on him, so he patiently took a seat on a nearby boulder and waited for the rest of his comrades to join him. He was not alone for long. Soon enough, he spotted the dwarves running towards him in the distance, along with, to his eternal surprise, a gangly wizard. He stood up and waved until he was sure they spotted him on the hill. "It's over here!" yelled the hobbit, pointing to the carving chiseled into the mountain behind him. "We found it!" Unsurprisingly, it was Gandalf who reached it at first, with the others trailing behind him. He tipped his hat in greeting and gave Bilbo a fond smile that made his eyes crinkle at the edges.
"Master Burglar, it is good to see you again,"
the wizard said.
"The others were just catching me up on your journey so far. I must say I did not realize you could speak Sindarian."
"You never asked," he retorted, giving his friend an innocent look that he had, ironically, learned from the wizard.
Of course. Clearly an error on my part."
Gandalf agreed with a nod as the others joined them.
"Is that it then?"
asked Thorin, tilting his head back to get a good look at the steep peak. Bilbo nodded. "I think so. We haven't found any other lead, right?" "No, this is all," replied Balin, looking to his cousin. "Thorin, this must be it. We need to start climbing if we want to reach it by sunset."
"Indeed, let's go,"
ordered the king, stalking off in a whirl of wool and fur. Bilbo stepped back and allowed the others to follow after the dwarf before moving to Gandalf's side. "Where were you all this time?" he asked in a lowered voice.
"I simply had an errand to run. Nothing to concern yourself with,"
reassured the wizard, patting his shoulder. Bilbo squinted up at his unnaturally tall friend. The first time around, Gandalf had left them to face off against the necromancer. He had not returned to their company until after Smaug had been killed and the Battle of Five Armies was about to begin. He did not know what Gandalf had gone off to take care of this time, but whatever it was, it clearly had nothing to do with the necromancer. He could not decide if this idea was alarming or not. "Is there something we should know about? Any sort of trouble following us?" the hobbit asked, carefully choosing his words. For all his innocent and foolish persona, Gandalf was as sharp as a blade and rarely missed even the smallest detail. He had no interest in trying to outsmart that brilliance for the rest of their journey. The wizard tilted his head down to meet his eyes. His bushy brows were raised, but his eyes lacked a suspicious glint.
"Not that I am aware of. The orcs that were following us seem to have given up, but that's all. Why, you suspect something?"
"No, not really," he lied, shaking his head so his growing curls hid his eyes from view. Back in Mirkwood I felt something dark and sinister and unnatural. I don't know what it was, but it scared me. So I was wondering if maybe you knew something."
"Ah, well, I suppose that makes sense,"
admitted Gandalf, rubbing his fingers against the wood of his staff.
"Mirkwood is a very old forest with a very long history. I am not surprised to hear that some of those memories made themselves known to you."
Bilbo wanted to bang his head against the mountain. Was the wizard being deliberately obtuse, or did he really not understand what Bilbo was hinting at? Did he really leave to confront the necromancer, or did he perhaps defeat the unnatural evil lurking in Dol Guldur this time around? He had so many questions, and frustratingly could not ask a single one.
"Do not worry yourself over Mirkwood,"
continued Gandalf, failing to notice his irritation.
"Whatever you sensed there unlikely followed you out of the forest. Take heart. I cannot sense anything strange around you or the others."
The hobbit gave his friend a strained smile. "Of course, Gandalf. Thank you for listening to my silly fears." Gandalf gave him a kind smile and patted his shoulder again.
"They are hardly silly, my friend. Mirkwood can haunt even the most courageous of souls. But enough of that now. I believe our comrades are beginning to climb and we best catch up with them."
"Of course," Bilbo agreed before following the wizard as he hurried to join the company. Once out of sight, he released a deep sigh and wondered not for the first time exactly what consequences his meddling would bring about. That evening, Bilbo found himself sitting at the edge of the cliff with his legs dangling dangerously over the rim. In front of him, the sun was beginning to set, while behind him he could hear his comrades arguing amongst each other. He could hear Balin muttering over the map with Ori and Oin, while Dwalin, Nori, and Move were trying to find the keyhole. He could also hear cursing and grunting, and soon the sounds of iron striking rock. "Dwalin, stop that! You cannot force the door open! I cannot hear with all this noise!
The sun is setting, we're losing light."
Are you sure you read this correctly? There's something there! No keyhole, no door, nothing but rock! We're going to miss it if we don't hurry up!" Bilbo simply rolled his eyes and leaned back on his hands to enjoy the sunset. The last time he had seen it, he had been too preoccupied with finding the keyhole. The Shire rarely hosted such a masterpiece of nature, and this time he wanted to enjoy the beautiful colors the setting sun casted across the sky. He sorely wished he could smoke, but he had run out of old Toby the night before, and it would be a cold day in Mordor before he allowed himself to smoke Southlinch. Blue, pink, orange, red, yellow. He listed to himself, counting off the different colors. Is that purple? Or maybe violet? Can't be lavender, far too dark. Maybe periwinkle? Bilbo, what are you doing? The hobbit looked over his shoulder at Dory, who had spoken. I'm trying to find all the colors of the sunset. Care to join me? So, we're losing valuable light and you're playing games, yelled Gloin, who had overheard his answer. Bilbo made a face at his friend and teacher. We are not losing light. We still have the moonlight to look for the keyhole. Or did you all forget what phase the moon is in? The two dwarfs stared at him for a moment before they both went yelling for Thorin. The hobbit snickered and returned to his sunset game. As the sun grew lower and lower, he found the colors growing into dark purples and blues and even silver. It was only when the sun finally set for good that he pulled himself away from the ledge and turned his attention to the dwarves and wizard once more. He found them all in front of the hidden door, the moonlight filtering through the wisps of clouds to show them the secret keyhole. As he watched, Thorin inserted his key and slowly unlocked it with a deep click that they all heard. Then he pushed the door open to reveal a dark and deep passage that would lead them all into Erebor. Bilbo joined his friends as they slowly made their way inside. He could see very little in the darkness, a trait his dwarves clearly did not share as they easily navigated into the tunnels. To his relief, Gandalf soon lit up the top of his staff and casted a white light over them all. With the help of the light, his eyes easily sought out the Dwarf King, who was now touching the smooth stone wall with one hand.
I know these walls,
Thorin whispered in a voice of untold heartbreak and memories. Next to him, Balin looked close to tears as he took in the small but carefully crafted chamber. The others looked no better. Oin had a hand over his eyes and looked to be whispering something under his breath. At his side, Dwalin was leaning against the wall, looking as if he had no energy left to support himself. Dory was being supported between Bifur and Gloin, while Ori was on the floor writing something in his book. Nearby, Nori was staring up at the designs above them as Bofur sunk to the ground near him, his hat pulled off and covering his face. Bombur was crying silently to himself as Gandalf patted him on the back. Bilbo felt his own eyes begin to water. His friends had finally made their way home. Had it been this emotional the last time around as well? Or was he simply more sensitive because he finally understood how much they had endured to get it back? It feels familiar, said Feely, tracing a line of runes with one finger. Like I've been here before. It feels like home, finished his brother. Keely stood in place next to him with his eyes closed as he breathed in the mountain of his kin. That's because we are home, rasped Bofur from beneath his hat. The dwarves at Erebor are home again. We're finally home. The rest of the company went silent at that. Bilbo shared a look with Gandalf, who nodded back. He hated to interrupt their moment of reunion, but they did have a job to do. Clearing his throat, he stepped forward. Well now, I believe this is where I come in. Is there anything in particular that I should be looking for when I investigate Smaug? His question snapped the dwarves out of their daze. They all looked at him before turning to their king with a range of expressions that Bilbo could not properly interpret. Even Thorin wore a look that seemed a cross between eating something sour or saying Thranduil again. Boy, we need to find a weakness first, answered Balin, once it became clear that Thorin was not going to speak. See if you can find a weak spot in his scales, or if he has any flaws. Something for us to focus on, if we are to kill him. Bilbo nodded. A weakness. Got it. Anything else?
Yes,
Thorin finally said, turning to look at him. When he met his eyes, Bilbo felt something heavy settle in his gut. He knew those midnight blue eyes. He had been dreading them since Mirkwood.
There is a stone that I would have you seek out,
the king said slowly.
It is a white gem that glows. I want you to keep an eye out for it when you're down there.
A white stone, he repeated, feeling like the ground had fallen out below him. Very well.
And what is the name of this glowing stone?
Thorin's dark eyes never wavered.
The Arkenstone.
Bilbo flinched. Arkenstone. Lovely name. Good to know I'm risking my life over a pretty rock with a pretty name. Be sure to mention that at my funeral. His words seemed to finally snap Thorin out of his thoughts.
I'm not asking you to go so far. Simply keep an eye out for it. If you don't see it, then that's fine. I'm not going to order you to die looking for it.
As if you could order me around to begin with, the hobbit grumbled as he pulled off his pack and dropped it to the ground next to Ori. He also retied his sash so his coat wouldn't come loose before untying Sting and dropping the blade next to his pack.
What are you doing? Don't you need that?
Asked Ori, picking up the sword and holding it out to him. Bilbo shook his head. No, it will only weigh me down and make more noise. I'm better off without it. But you should still bring a weapon with you, insisted Dory, looking to Nori. The thief nodded and reached down to tug a single dagger loose from his boot.
Take it,
the thief ordered, handing it to Bilbo.
just in case.
The hobbit nodded and tucked the small blade away in his coat.
Don't forget what I told you about the whistle,
ordered Bolver, peeking out from behind his hat.
Use it if you need our help. I mean it.
I will, Bolver, he promised, trying to put his friend at ease. Now, if there is nothing else, I believe it is time for me to fulfill my part in the contract. None of the dwarves tried to stop him, but they still did not look very happy. Bilbo ignored the frowns and scowls and simply gave Gandalf a final nod before he descended into the city for the first time in his life. Erebor was a tomb. Bilbo could think of no other word to describe it. It was a tomb of riches and ruins, greed and grief, and a murdered race that cried out for vengeance. He didn't enjoy walking through the dark halls the first time, and he certainly didn't care for it the second time. What was worse was knowing that at the end of his journey, a sleeping dragon was waiting for him. Calm down now. You know how to handle this dragon. You've done it before and you could do it again. Just stick to the plan and everything will be fine. He tried to console himself, skipping down a few stone steps. And even if you die here, Bard knows what to do. He will kill Smaug and save Lake Town. But who will save your friends? Asked the ring, reading his real fear far too easily. Did I ask for your opinion? He snapped back. Stay out of this! The ring, thankfully, remained silent. Eventually, Bilbo came to a horribly familiar hall and stopped short. Mountains and mountains of treasure was laid out before him. Gold and silver, emeralds and diamonds. There was no end to it all. Above him, the few lit torches reflected off the precious metals and gems and made the hall glitter like the ocean at night. It would have been an altogether wondrous sight if he did not know what was sleeping beneath all that gold and silver. He wrinkled his nose before turning his attention to other matters. He looked over the stairs he stood upon and the multiple exits and covers it provided. He took note of the pillars that offered protection, and finally estimated if any fire could harm the pathway behind him. Once satisfied, he moved to the raised plain that overlooked the room and took in a deep breath before letting it out through his nose. Well, time to get to work. Smaug! Oh, Smaug the Tremendous! I call upon you. Please grace me with your magnificent presence. I have come a long way to gaze upon your glorious majesty. Bilbo recited, cupping his hands around his mouth in order to make his voice louder. His shouts echoed through the chamber before silence descended again. The hobbit dropped his hands and waited. Soon, too soon if he was being honest, he heard the shifting of gold coins followed by a loud huff. Then the sound of 2 large feet standing up followed that, and then the jingle of coins as the dragon made his way to the hobbit. Bilbo could see his great shadow on the walls of the chambers, and the sight of it brought back the bitter taste of fear. He ducks behind a pillar as Smaug's fire goes flying past him. He can feel the heat of it on both sides, and it is like nothing he has ever known. He half expects to burst into flames just from the heat alone. He can feel the sweat sliding down his face and neck and knows he's going to have blisters and burns on his arms and legs. If he survives this all, he swears to never get close to an open fire again. Bilbo swallowed back his fear and memories as Smaug finally came into view. To his horror, the dragon seemed even bigger than he recalled. His teeth and claws even looked sharper, and his scales seemed harder and rougher. Smaug's ember eyes were still the same, though. Still bright and wide, and so very, very cruel.
Well, now, what do we have here?
Asked the dragon, leaning in to give the hobbit a deep sniff. It took every ounce of control that he had not to jump away and take cover when the dragon did. At that range, he felt that he could see the bloodstains on Smaug's very pointed teeth. He forced his gaze not to linger there and looked up at the drake. I am a hobbit, he replied, digging his nails into the palms of his hands to control his shaking. I have come from far from the west to gaze upon your entire splendor. Truly, the songs and tales fall utterly short of the reality. Oh, Smaug, the greatest of calamities. Smaug huffed and pulled away until he could see the hobbit properly.
An intruder with manners. I have not seen many of those before. Tell me, where did you learn my name? I doubt they whisper of me so far away.
Through stories, of course. Everyone knows how you defeated the dwarves of Erebor and took from them their treasure, he explained, trying to give the dragon a smile. It felt more like a grimace to him, though. Such mighty beings are known even to us hobbits. Truly, you are clever and powerful. Smaug sniffed and tossed his head back, obviously preening.
Indeed, I am all that you speak of and more. It is good that you lesser creatures realize this, but you still have not told me the entire truth. Why are you really here?
Bilbo bit his lower lip. Smaug had the uncanny ability to tell when he was lying, and he did not wish to risk making the dragon angry just yet. Honesty was the only answer he could give. I have come here to ask you a question, he admitted. It is about your fire. Can it truly melt anything in existence?
Ha! My fire can melt the very stone from these walls,
the dragon boasted, curling his wings in closer as he loomed over the hobbit.
Iron or mithril, flesh or bone, my fire burns through all. Nothing can withstand my flames.
What about a ring? Can your fire melt a ring? He asked quickly before the dragon could continue his odes to himself. Smaug paused and tilted his head to the side. His serpentine eyes narrowed into slits of bloody amber as he ran his tongue over his teeth.
That depends. What type of ring is it?
A gold one, replied the hobbit, reaching into his pocket and pulling it out to show the dragon. See? It is a simple ring. You did not mention gold in your list, so I wonder if you perhaps cannot melt that. Am I wrong?
Wrong indeed, little hobbit.
The dragon spat, his nostrils flailing open. He pulled his large head back and gave a jerky nod to the floor.
Set your silly little ring down and move out of the way. I will show you the glory of my flames.
Bilbo quickly set the ring down and hurried to hide behind a pillar. When he heard the dragon drawing in a deep breath, he closed his eyes and clasped a hand over his mouth to muffle any shrieks or noises he could possibly make. Please work, please work, please work, please work. Smaug released his fire and Bilbo shuddered. Even hidden away to the side, he could still feel the heat of the flames. It was just as hot and terrifying as he recalled. How did he ever manage to survive the first time around against such a fearsome beast? When the fire died away, he waited a moment for another breath of fire and found none. Carefully, he stepped out from his hiding place and found Smaug staring down at the still, perfectly formed ring. Guess not even dragons could destroy it, he cursed, walking back and scooping up the still cold ring. He rubbed it between his fingers before looking up to meet the wide gaze of the dragon. It didn't work, he observed quietly. Why didn't it work? I thought your fire could melt anything.
It can,
replied Smaug, his eyes never blinking. He had yet to move from his crouched position, and Bilbo felt something cold slither down his spine when he realized that.
My fire can burn through all rings of power,
The dragon continued, never moving his unblinking gaze from the hobbit.
All the rings. Except one.
Bilbo felt his heart stop.
No. One ring to rule them all,
recited the dragon, slowly uncurling his wings and drawing his wide shoulders back. No, 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 no.
One ring to find them,
the beast continued, raising his neck high and tossing his head back. He can't, no, he just can't.
One ring to bring them all.
The dragon crooned, his ember eyes growing impossibly wider. His chest began to glow a bright red and orange as he gathered his fire together. Run, the ring advised, for once sounding reasonable.
And in the darkness, bind them.
At the end of his sentence, Smaug finally released his flames in a great wave of fire. Bilbo ran. He ran and leapt down a flight of stairs as the red and orange flames chased after him. He went tumbling, rolling down the hard stones before falling onto the piles of gold coins. He hit the treasure hard, knocking the breath from his lungs in one swoop. Bilbo gasped and struggled for breath even as he yanked the ring on. The world immediately melted into duller shades of color. He took a moment to catch his breath before pushing himself to his feet, stumbling a few times before catching himself. When he finally looked around, he spotted Smaug through the haze, shuffling through his gold like mad. Coins and gems went flying through the air as the dragon dug through the hoard of treasure with desperation similar to that of a thirsty man digging for water.
Hobbit, come out,
bellowed the dragon, his deep voice sounding softer and slower to Bilbo. He watched the dragon carefully as he backtracked to the nearest flight of stairs. Once there, he took in his surroundings and realized that he was close to where his comrades were waiting. This is not the way I wanted to go. He wasn't supposed to recognize the ring, he thought, casting his gaze to the frantic dragon before looking back to the stairs. Guess there's no helping it now. Keely it is. Then, before he could regret his decision, Bilbo pulled out the whistle from beneath his shirt and blew as hard as he could. Smaug immediately turned to the sound and whirlwind of gold and silver.
Hobbit, give me the ring.
Bilbo ignored the dragon and began to run up the staircase. He jumped as many steps as he could and even slipped a few times, but not for one moment did he stop. Behind him, he could hear the dragon roaring for him over and over again as he stomped through the chambers. His massive weight made the ground shake, and Bilbo nearly stumbled off the stairs a few times. But he persevered and kept running until he was finally back on the platform from earlier. Once there, he slipped the ring off and sprinted for the secret corridor. But before he even reached the opening, he found himself smacking headfirst into the iron chest of Thorin.
Bilbo!
Thorin grabbed him by the biceps before he could bounce back from the impact. He groaned and leaned forward against the door for a moment, trying to get the world to stop spinning on him. He had a feeling he was going to have another bruise on his forehead thanks to a certain dwarf. That hurts! What are you wearing under that coat? He mumbled into the king's chest. He felt and heard the dwarf snort.
Clothes.
Bilbo had been imagining something a bit different, like a stone chestplate or steel armor. Oh, your clothes hurt me.
It wasn't the clothes that hurt you,
muttered the king as he pulled back and slid his hands to Bilbo's shoulders. He looked the hobbit up and down before finally meeting his eyes.
What happened? We heard your call.
Seriously? You heard that little shriek? The hobbit wondered, blinking around before realizing that the entire company and Gandalf were there. Wow! Bolver, you make one really good whistle. Good job!
Come out! Come out! Now!
Bilbo and his comrades jumped at the sudden bellow of rage that echoed through the chamber. He suddenly remembered the reason why he had called them. Oh, yeah. Smaug is awake and he's kind of angry.
Hobbit!
I may have provoked him, he added, blinking up at the king. But not on purpose. It was an accident. I didn't think he would act this way.
Give it to me.
Bilbo, what did you do? Gaped Bomber, his mouth falling open and his eyes widening to the size of dinner plates. The rest of the company looked no better, withdrawing, cursing, and pulling at his axes while Gloin cracked his knuckles. Before Bilbo could defend himself, though, Smaug finally spotted them on the stairs. When he saw all the dwarves, he immediately lost what little self-control he had left.
Insolent little liar! How dare you bring those thieving worms here? I will kill you all and take my reward from your corpse!
The dragon roared before shooting a wave of flames at them. The company scattered. For the second time that day, Bilbo found himself falling off the platform and onto the gold below, but this time he was not alone. Thorin wrapped his arms around him in a tight embrace that hurt his bruises and rolled so that the dwarf took most of the impact when they landed. Though he was saved from the brunt of the fall, Bilbo still found himself gasping in pain, as dwarves were not the softest of landing pads. Before he had a chance to gather his wits, Thorin was pulling him up with one hand, dragging him down the mountain of treasure. As Smaug continued his pursuit, he flinched at the sound of the dragon's howls and mindless screeching. Smaug seemed to have lost all composure at the sight of the One Ring and was now nothing more than a raging beast. The hobbit had never seen a scarier sight than an insane dragon. Thorin glanced over his shoulder before his eyes went wide, before Bilbo could ask him why the king was yanking him behind a pillar and caging him against it with his whole body as Smaug threw another blast of fire at them. At the touch of heat, he wrapped his arms around the dwarf and pulled him closer in order to keep him as far from the fire as he could. Don't let it end here, please, please don't let it end here, not when we're so close to the end of our quest.
Bilbo, what did you say to him?
Thorin muttered into his hair. Not important right now, he replied into the dwarf's chest. Thorin, I know how to kill him on his left breast, near his heart. He is missing a scale. It's his only weakness, and our only chance to kill him, we have to tell the others. Thorin stiffened against him before cursing in Cuzdal. As the flames around them died down, he stepped back and moved out into the open to shout to the others,
His left breast! His weakness is in his left breast! Killy, hit him there!
Bilbo winced as Smaug released another roar, and then found himself running with Thorin once more. The dwarf dragged him down another hill of coins and jewels before forcing him up a flight of stairs. When they reached the top, he found Ori and Bifur there, hiding in wait.
Take him,
ordered Thorin, pushing the hobbit towards Bifur.
Go back to the side door and get out of here. Don't let the worm find him.
Thorin, no, I'm not leaving you here all alone, Bilbo objected, spinning around to face the king.
I wasn't asking you,
Thorin growled, unsheathing Orcrist. He said something in Cuzdal to the two dwarves, who both nodded solemnly in reply. Then he turned and jumped off the stairs and back into the fray below. Thorin! Bilbo moved to follow, but found himself stopped short by Bifur. He turned around and tugged on the hand holding his wrist cap, trying to twist free from the iron grip. Bifur, let go! I have to help them! They need me! He'd said, digging his feet into the ground and pulling back with all his strength. Bifur shook his head, his face hard and unwavering. At his side, Ori too was wearing a serious look that made his resemblance to Dori even more obvious.
We can't let you do that, Bilbo,
the scribe said, his tone softening only the slightest bit.
Thorin has ordered us to keep you safe, and this is what we're going to do.
Bilbo cursed and bared his teeth in a vicious snarl. I don't care what he ordered you to do. I won't let them die. Now let me go! Ori's face wavered for a moment until Bifur snapped something at him in Cuzdal. He began to drag Bilbo back towards the secret door, his tight grip never loosened. Ori soon followed behind, his face once more stone firm. Behind them, Bilbo could hear the sound of dwarven war cries clashing with Smaug's fierce roars. The noise made his ears ring and his skin go clammy and cold. No, not again! Bifur, please let me go. I can't leave them behind. Not with Smaug. They'll die! He pleaded with the warrior. Bifur ignored him and simply kept dragging him along. Bilbo tugged harder as desperation began to claw its way up his throat. Bifur, your cousins are down there. Ori's brothers are down there. Your king is even there. They all need us. The toymaker faltered and then stopped for a moment. He glanced over his shoulder and met the hobbit's eyes with his own dark ones. Bilbo could not read the dwarf's thoughts, but he hoped the dwarf would read him. I can't let Thorin die, not like this, not when there's a chance I could save him, he gasped, feeling as if his heart was trying to pound its way through his chest. Please, I can't lose him. Bifur's eyes widened and his grip on Bilbo's wrist went loose. He didn't hesitate and pulled away from the dwarf and began to sprint back to the chamber behind him. He could hear the other two running after him, but paid them no mind as he jumped off the platform and into the gold below. As he fell, he pulled on the ring and disappeared from sight. When he hit the gold, he forced his body into a roll to absorb the impact. Then he got to his feet and looked over the area. Smaug was chasing after Nori and Bolver, while the others tried their best to distract the beast. Above them, he could see Gandalf and Keely running up a flight of stairs, obviously searching for a safe spot for the dwarf to fire his arrows. They need time for Keely to line up the shot, he thought, twisting the finger on his ring. Is that what the others are doing? Trying to give him time? For the first time since the Misty Mountains, Bilbo found that he did not know what to do. He couldn't figure out the dwarf's strategy, and he didn't know how to draw Smaug's attention without getting killed. All he could do was stand there and gape as his friends tried their best not to get burnt alive over his foolish mistake. Think, Bilbo, think! He looked around the room before zeroing in on Thorin, who was leaping off one of the stairs and onto the dragon's back. Smaug tried to throw him off, but the dwarf slid down his chest before attempting to ram his sword into the opening of Smaug's chest. He missed by inches, but did not seem discouraged as he rolled out of the way of another blast of fire. Above him, Dwalin took his chance to also jump off a flight of stairs, and the cycle continued. So that's what they're doing, he realized, beginning to run towards the dragon and dwarfs. They are distracting him, but unless Smaug stands still, Keely will never get a clear shot. As he drew closer, he looked up to where Gandalf and Keely had finally come to an open ledge that stood in perfect range of the dragon. Smaug, still distracted by the others, had not noticed the two. But he knew that would not last. And soon the wizard and archer would lose their chance to take the fiend out for good. So not knowing any other way, Bilbo took off the ring. It did not take Smaug long to notice him. The hobbit wondered briefly if his red coat made him stand out against all the gold and silver. He hoped it didn't, because he knew the fact would make Dory sad.
Little hobbit.
Smaug sneered, pausing in the act of swiping Bomber to the side. He stood tall and arched his wings back.
You have finally come out of hiding.
Bilbo, run! Yelled Bolfer, who was the nearest dwarf to him. He ignored his friend and raised his head high to meet the dragon's gaze with every bit of courage he had. He wished there was more of it. I was never hiding, he retorted, clasping the ring between his shaking hands. I was running because you tried to kill me without reason. Smaug tossed his head back and laughed. It was a horrible sound of twisted metal and crackling lightning.
You want a reason? I will give you one. You helped these foolish dwarves. Is that reason enough for you?
Bilbo flinched and glanced up at where Keely was aiming a glowing white arrow at the dragon. He quickly looked back to the creature and stepped forward to keep all the attention on himself. You won't win, he yelled back, trying to smother the flickering fear in him. Even if we fall here, others will come to fight you. This is the end, O Smaug the Tremendous. Your time has come. Smaug's eyes widened and his mouth pulled back in a snarl that showed his many, many teeth.
Foolish little maggot. I am king under the mountain, and I...
The dragon's speech was cut off as a single arrow embedded itself into his chest. Smaug screamed a scream so loud that the very heart of the mountain shook. Bilbo collapsed to his knees and covered his sensitive ears with his hands. He watched with hooded eyes as the dragon fell to the ground in a resounding boom that knocked them all to their feet. Gold and silver flew through the air, and he scrambled to avoid getting caught under an avalanche of treasure. Then everything went still and silent as they all waited for Smaug to rise once more. He did not. Bilbo slowly, very slowly, rose to his feet. His legs felt weak and loose like jelly and threatened to collapse under him, but he pushed himself forward until he finally stood before Smaug. The dragon lay as still as stone, his ember eyes glazed and dark with death. At his chest was Keely's arrow, buried into the single spot free of scales and jewels. We did it. He's dead, he whispered, feeling a strange sort of numb wonder. Oh, it's over. It's all over. Mahal, breathed Dory, joining him in staring at the dragon. The rest soon appeared, and then they were all crowded around the corpse of the dragon once known as Smaug. No one spoke a word for a long time until finally Feely began to laugh. He's dead! He's dead, and Keely killed him, and Mother is going to skin me alive for letting him near a dragon! He gasped, laughing through his words. He let out a high shriek that greatly resembled a bird, and then turned to scoop his sibling into a hug that lifted him off his feet. You did it, Keely! You killed Smaug! The prince yelled, and it was as if a dam had broken because the rest of the company began to cheer and shout and nearly mugged Feely in their attempts to embrace Keely. Bilbo watched it all with a smile as he slowly sunk to his knees, his emotions and words finally catching up to him. He didn't mind, though. Smaug was dead, and his friends were alive, and he would happily endure another round with Azog if he could keep it that way. Bilbo. He looked up and found Thorin kneeling next to him. He gave the king a shaky smile before squeaking as he was swept up into a crushing embrace. For the third time that day, Bilbo found himself squished against Thorin's stone chest. You're alright, the dwarf whispered, burying his face in his curls. One arm settled around his waist while the other slipped up around his shoulders as he practically pulled the hobbit into his lap. Bilbo could feel all the blood rushing to his face as he breathed in the smell of fire and sweat and iron. What was Thorin doing? Thorin, are you alright? He asked, his voice unfairly high to his ears.
I'm fine. Smaug couldn't catch me.
the king replied softly, misinterpreting the question.
I was more concerned for you. Standing up to the beast like that, honestly. Is there nothing that you fear?
Yes, I have a lot of fears, he admitted easily. I just don't let my fears keep me from doing what I must. Thorin chuckled.
You are very brave. That courage is what brought down the greatest enemy of my people. I thank you for that, Poopa Baggins. Thank you for avenging my people.
Gilly was the one who shot the arrow, Bilbo muttered, even as he slowly brought his arms up and wrapped them around the king's waist. The moment he did, Thorin tightened his hold even more until Bilbo was sure he was going to break in half. But he didn't protest the rough treatment. Instead, he relaxed into the embrace and buried his face against the furred coat and allowed himself the small and guilty pleasure of being held by the only one he had ever loved. Smaug was dead, but they, Fili, Gilly, Thorin, were still alive.